Hi everyone. So the misconception that I'm going to focus on today is centered around the force of gravity. So the other day in class, I just randomly picked up a dry erase eraser and a stapler, and I looked at my class and I said, if I were to drop these from the same height, what would happen? And the two most common responses that I received from my fourth graders was the first one was the eraser will hit the ground first because it's lighter. Then a lot of the other kids said the stapler will hit the ground first because it weighs more. And nobody actually said that they would hit at the same time. So I started kind of diving into this and was like, all right, how can I break this misconception of my students? And then I think the likely cause is just because that's what the students have learned in the past, that weight does affect gravity. So I was looking around online and I found something on PBS Learning, okay? And the experiment that I found involves taking an apple, a full apple and a half apple, and dropping it. So the first thing that I did with it, and this is something that I added to it because I think it was important for the sake of looking at the weight specifically, is just having the kids weigh the full apple. So as you see here, the full apple weighs 340 grams, and then having the kids weigh the half apple, which ended up weighing 204 grams. So then one of my students just started doing mental math. As you can actually see, we wrote up here on the small on the whiteboard, and he found that the difference and said, okay, so the smaller apple weighs a good amount less than, or the half apple weighs a good amount less than the whole apple. And then we made our predictions again and talked about what we think would happen with the apples when we drop them. And again, some kids said the full apple is going to hit the ground first because it weighs more. Other kids said the half apple will hit the ground first because it weighs less. So we actually tested it. And as you can see here, he dropped it. He didn't drop it perfectly, but you get the idea. And they hit at the same time. So the kids are then stunned and they're trying to figure out what exactly happens and why it's taking place. So then as the lesson progressed, I took it into Galileo and his experiment of the hammer and feather falling on the moon and how they dropped at the same time. The kids again were surprised. So then I had another student take a hammer and a feather that I made out of paper and drop those at the same time to see what hits the ground first. Again, some of the kids said that the hammer would hit first, some kids said that the feather will hit first, and some kids said they would hit at the same time because of the video that we just watched. So then the actual explanation, and this came straight from the website, which is at the bottom there. But before you begin, you may want to review the following terms. Mass is the amount of matter in a given volume of something. Volume is the amount of space that an object or substance takes up. An object's mass is what determines how much force is needed to move, speed up, or slow down the object. The greater the object's mass, the more force it takes to change its motion. Gravity is the force that exists between any two objects that have mass. Weight is a measure of the force of gravity pulling on an object. Some people think that the mass of an object and its weight are one and the same, probably because we weigh things to determine their mass. But weight and mass are not the same. How much something weighs depends on how strongly gravity is pulling on it. So something will weigh less where the gravitational force on it is weaker, for example, as on the moon or in space, even though its mass has not changed. So the misconception that I was trying to break here was the idea that weight does affect the gravity. And then we took this when we were actually weighing the apples and talked about how weight specifically is the amount of gravitational force that's pulling the object down. And then we talked about kind of pulling the apple up off the scale and how that changes the weight and so forth. When we did the hammer and the feather experiment, we then got into the discussion about air resistance and how that's a force that opposes any object moving through the air. And then we had a little bit of a discussion about air resistance and how that relates to gravity. And walking away from the lesson. Now the lesson was only 40 minutes long. This was with an after-school tutoring group that we're going to pick up our next steps with it on Monday when we have tutoring again. But their takeaway from the whole lesson was a lot of questions, a lot of confusion, but they all agreed that weight doesn't actually have an effect on the amount or on the gravity. Um, so next time I'm going to talk a little bit about how mass affects gravity, and then we'll also get into understanding that all objects fall at 9.8 meters per second or 32 feet per second. If you look down here at the citation, I did include the website. I'll include that in my post as well, and then gave credit to the site and the company that put this experiment together. If you go on there, there are a lot more features to this lesson. It's actually a 3-day lesson. I just try to pull different parts from it for the sake of this project. But they have videos and different resources on there as well. So thanks.